So, in conclusion, Theodosia Ammons was a woman who used her connection to domestic science as an avenue to breaking barriers and getting involved in politics. And using Theodosia as a lens to understand the significance of Colorado women's 1893 success is also a way to understand that women, including suffragists, were these multifaceted individuals who had multiple interests, just like people today. That's why I think history is so much fun to study. And in my research, I looked at this journal called the Suffrage Focused Journal based out of Boston, the Woman's Journal. And they actually noted and mentioned Theodosia and her model cottage several times in their newspaper. And they said they recognized the important intersection between women in politics and women at home, referencing this model home of Theodosia's as an example of this very intersection. And they said, evidently, the ballot does not cause women to lose their interest in the home, but rather leads them to study its needs more intelligently. Now, sadly, Theodosia died at the age of 45 in 1907 of an unknown illness before the 19th Amendment passed. And it is really incredible to reflect on all the many accomplishments of Theodosia's short life and realize how much more she assuredly would have accomplished if she had lived longer. Despite the concerns by many that women voting would not only upset the structure of the home, but the entire society at large, Theodosia showed that women could be both politically engaged citizens and efficient homemakers. And the intersection of domestic science and suffrage from the lens and perspective of Theodosia shows how domestic science did not limit women to staying in the home, but encouraged them to extend domesticity to include public and even political spaces. And suffrage did not relegate women to only being in the public sphere, but gave them the tools to better society and their home through their vote. And now it is my honor to introduce the world premiere of the video tour of Gwenthean Cottage by Catherine Long Gates.
Well, hello. I'm Catherine Long Gates, and I'm so happy to be able to welcome you today to the Gwenthean Cottage. The cottage is named for the three sisters, Gwendolyn, Theodosia, and Anne, who were instrumental in its development. It's located here in Colorado, Chautauqua, and Boulder, Colorado. Gwendolyn was my grandmother, and her oldest sister, Theodosia, was the one who actually designed the cottage. Theodosia was my grandmother's oldest sister. She was born in 1861 in North Carolina, and when she was just 10 years old, her family moved here to Colorado. They settled in the Denver area, and Theodosia became involved as a teacher in Fort Collins, actually the first female faculty member of the Colorado Agricultural College in Fort Collins, which is now Colorado State University. So in 1898, when the Colorado Chautauqua was founded here in Boulder, they actually had departments, just like a college, because it was a summer school. And Theodosia was invited to come and head the Department of Domestic Sciences. So domestic sciences we tend to think of maybe as home ec, but in those days it really combined a lot of different disciplines. One of them was architecture, a lot of it was design, and Theodosia was very interested in creating efficiencies in living, particularly to make a benefit for the women. In the second year of the Chautauqua, 1899, she designed and had built this cottage where we are now. She wanted to use a lot of her ideas, and she also wanted to create this as a model summer home that she could use for a living laboratory. I think she did pretty well, because here we are 120 years later, and we really haven't changed very much. So one of the design features that I think Theodosia really got right was on this porch design. You'll notice that the porch is really large. It's actually larger outside than inside. That's because a lot of the living took place outside to get the fresh air. And she designed the porch with really close spindles. That way it was going to be a good place for little children. I'd like to show you how the gate works. It's actually fairly heavy, and that way a small person couldn't easily lift it. But It actually isn't too hard to get into place here. It just slides down and drops into place, and voila. We have a child-proof gate, and we've turned the porch into the world's largest playpen. So this is the south porch, and it was mainly for everyday living, good place to read, study, visit with the neighbors, but it was also the part of the porch where they would have eating. This is one of the design features that I think worked out quite well and created a lot of efficiencies. This is the pass-through. So this enabled the person that was cooking in the kitchen to contain the heat in the kitchen and be able to pass the food out to the porch. And here we are. This is one of the very simple but helpful design features that Theodosia incorporated. She just put the screens on the lower half of the window, thereby the upper half has full light and full view. The screening, she hinged just on the side, so we see that it's very easy to just open it up and be able to clean the window. A small thing, but when you have quite a few windows on a big porch like this, it definitely cut down on the housework. So a good design feature. We're going to take a look at the north porch, which was also an area for living, but it was used primarily for sleeping. And you'll see that we've already got a cot set up here. In the past, you might have had some visitors in the night. It would usually be something like a raccoon or a skunk. These days, it might be something a little larger, like a bear or a mountain lion. But people enjoyed trying as much as possible to sleep outside in the good, clean air. Keep in mind that this cottage was built in 1899. At that point in history, a lot of people suffered from tuberculosis. And Boulder was an area that people came to because they knew that anecdotally, if people came to a higher, drier climate, they had a better chance of survival. Now we're going to go ahead and go on inside, but before we do, I wanted to show you that some things don't change here at the cottage. In fact, most things don't change, as we'll see. One of them is the keys that we have here to unlock the door, same ones that were here originally. So now we'll go on inside. So one of the things that I think Theodosia chose very well is the wood beadboard for the walls and the ceilings. So this is the original wall and ceiling covering, and in all these 120 years, it's never had to be refinished. In fact, it's very seldom had anything done to it, occasionally a little dusting. But think about in your own home how many times you probably have painted or wallpapered. And not only the time and the energy expended on that, but think about the resources expended. So from an environmental standpoint, I think this was an ingenious decision to use this, plus the fact that it creates a very warm feeling. I love the look of the wood. We talked about how people like to sleep out on the porch, and that was definitely the preference, to get that fresh air. But there were times that that wasn't the best choice, and so this cottage does have 2 bedrooms. This front bedroom was, I think, often for whoever was designated as the chosen one because it's the most luxurious, if you want to call it that. And there was the opportunity to have some privacy with curtains. We'll also notice there's some things around here on the walls, and here we have a picture of the mother of the 3 people that the cottage is named for. So this is their mother, Margaret Caroline Brendel Ammons, who is from North Carolina. So here are the 3 women that the cottage is named for: Gwendolyn, Theodosia, and Anne. So Gwenthean. And Gwendolyn was my grandmother. She was the youngest sister. Theodosia was the oldest. So Theodosia born in 1861. And she sort of shepherded her little sister, Gwendolyn. Theodosia and Anne, both of them didn't marry. In those days, that gave them actually more opportunities because once women married, they generally couldn't teach. All 3 women were teachers. Theodosia designed the cottage, was teaching, taking care of the family, really doing a lot, working with the women's suffrage movement. She was very active in that, but accomplished things in a very short amount of time because she actually died in 1907. So we know that The cottage was built in 1899. She didn't have a whole lot of time to enjoy this, but while she did, she used this area, the cottage, as her living laboratory for the classes she held here at the Colorado Chautauqua. And one of the things was this room, the dining room, which had the pass-through from the kitchen. We saw the pass-through out to the porch because people were often eating out on the porch. But when they were eating inside, they could actually go ahead and pass the food through from the kitchen here into the dining room. So this bedroom is where we see the one major design change in the cottage. Originally, what we see now was a window. And my mother would tell stories about when she was a child staying here at the cottage, coming into the back bedroom, getting in her pajamas and all, and then climbing through the window to sleep out on the porch. So finally, at some point in time, there was enough money and enough frustration maybe with climbing through that window that they actually had a door put in. The bathroom was pretty modern for 1899 and actually serves pretty well today. The fixtures are the originals. There's a very comfortable bathtub, really can't beat that, and a pretty energy efficient toilet for the time because the high tank toilet actually used gravity, and so it didn't require nearly as much water as the toilets that came after it. Plus it's a lot of fun when you pull that chain and you get a big whoosh. There were design features here too to make things efficient, including having a closet, even in here in a bathroom with a cute little door, but it makes it possible to store your cleaning supplies, linens, things that you needed right where you need them. Again, keeping to that theme of efficiency. One of the innovative features, it's a small one, but something that makes a difference, is the towel rack over here so that you could have things right over the bathtub. It's a very simple design. The kitchen is where you'll probably see the most changes in this cottage. Obviously, there are some things that weren't here in 1899. There probably would have been an icebox. These days, we have a regular refrigerator. And the water heater is certainly an addition. The water would have been heated on the stove, and this stove here is actually called Success. And my mother always made a joke out of, how can you fail with a stove named Success? But she was quite quick to say that she failed many times. But because you were cooking on wood and coal, it really heated things up, and this is a summer home. So one of the things was how to keep that heat as much contained as possible. So there's a very heavy door to the kitchen. The area is small. There are 2 windows. It's really a lot of ventilation for a pretty small room. And then, as we talked about, there's the pass-through so that the poor person who's cooking is definitely getting hot, but the other people can stay away in the rest of the cottage or out on the porch preferably, and they'll be able to enjoy what's being cooked in here, and it's being taken out through the pantry here to the pass-through out to the porch. One of the things here that you'll also see on the stove is a flat iron. So some people wonder about how the wonderful rock formations we have behind us here at Chautauqua got their name. And if you look at that shape of the flat iron, it is very much like those wonderful sandstone slabs out there. And in fact, they were originally called the Chautauqua slabs. These flat irons came in different weights for different things you were going to iron. This is a 6-pounder. So, you know, you built up your muscles using these as well as trying to get them to the right temperature here. So much the same, but a few changes to make life a little easier. People often notice the details here in the cottage, things like the hinges. There's a door plate on this nice heavy door to the kitchen. They're very ornate, very detailed. And I think that's showing things from the Victorian age when people were really trying to show the artistry, took a lot of pride in their work, and put a lot of effort and artistry into something we think of as kind of utilitarian, and these days we just see things pretty plain. So it's something that tells us a little bit about the age and maybe things being more hands-on and less manufactured. Well, thank you so much for coming on this tour of the Gwenthean Cottage. I hope you've kind of taken a step back in time. It's one of the benefits of being able to preserve historic structures like this, is that we can experience what it was like 120 years ago. So think about how this has benefited the people of this community, not only the broader Boulder community, but all of those who have been able to benefit from being a part of the Chautauqua here in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay, back. Sarah and Catherine, I want to thank you all so much for just a fascinating presentation. Sarah, for weaving that wonderful story about Theodosia Ammons and the issues around the turn of the last century. And Catherine, for welcoming us into your cottage. It is a privilege to see it. And it's just remarkable the way in which your family has cared for it and preserved it. It's an important piece of Chautauqua history writ large, I think, not just the Colorado Chautauqua, but that it's preserved as a Chautauqua cottage during that Chautauqua movement. So thanks to both of you tonight. Really appreciate that. Before I turn the Q&A part of this presentation over to Jason Hill, who's Chautauqua's Director of Operations, I would like to also welcome Margaret Long, who is Catherine's sister, and obviously also a great niece of Theodosia Ammons. And thank you to Margaret for your part in preserving that cottage. Margaret and Catherine are co-owners of it and have the responsibility of taking that cottage forward into another 100 years of history, we hope. So now I'd like to turn the Zoom floor over to Jason Hill to answer, get some questions answered and round out our program for tonight. Jason?
Thank you, Cindy. And thank you, Sarah and Catherine, for making this event possible. We had quite a turnout tonight, so it was really exciting to see well over 100 people here tonight. So very cool. Thank you all. So we've got, let's see here, we've got a few questions so far. Folks, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A. You can also raise your hand and we can, you can join us here to ask your question personally. So to start, Ruth says, this is fascinating. Can we get a copy of your thesis or will you be turning it into a book?
You know, I hope to turn it into a book. That is the plan. It seems a lot harder, easier said than done maybe, but yeah. I will say if I get the book published, maybe y'all can have me back and I can talk about it then.
There you go. I like that. Okay, let's see here. So here we go. Sarah mentioned the Black Women's Club participating in the Colorado suffrage movement. As with the 19th Amendment nationwide, were they excluded from benefiting from the Colorado referendum?
That's a good question. I think that there were similarities. It's why this year, as I've been talking about the 19th Amendment, I like to say the word commemorate rather than celebrate, because it does acknowledge that not all women readily got the right to vote in 1920. There were still, even if legally they had it, there were so many barriers that continued. They faced discrimination, particularly African-American women with under Jim Crow laws, just like African-American men had faced ever since 1870 with the passage of the 15th Amendment. And so, but in Colorado, Elizabeth Ensley was a woman who, she was an African-American woman who was actually one of the officers in the Colorado Equal Suffrage Association. And she really activated and organized the Black Women's Club movement in Denver and Colorado more broadly. And that was really key to the success in 1893, because she really also talked to African American men at the time and convinced them to vote for this in favor of the referendum. And so I think that was, in the case of Colorado, that ended up being, I think, a more successful alliance than what you saw in a lot of other states and even across the nation 27 years later.
Thank you. There are famous Colorado people on both sides of Catherine and Margaret's family. Could they please tell us about them?
Well, I don't know about famous, but hopefully not too infamous. But so it's kind of interesting in that Theodosia obviously is on my mother's side of the family, but my sister and I have an interesting thing in growing up and hearing about her, and that she was a professor at what's now Colorado State University. But on our dad's side of the family, our great aunt, Alice B. Curtis, was also a professor at Fort Collins, and she was younger than Theodosia, but she also was very active in the suffrage movement, and for a time at least was the secretary to Carrie Chapman Catt. So she had a very active role in things. So we have those sort of parallel universes, and my gosh, I'm sure Margaret would join me in saying it was a lot of very strong women to live up to. So we're very fortunate that we had that background, and a lot of wonderful men who supported that, which is very important. I think when Sarah was telling the story about Eliza Rout, John Rout, I'm sure got a lot of pressure from Eliza, but he truly seemed to believe in the women's suffrage movement. So it isn't just about women, and I think that's a lot of what it was for Theodosia. It was about improving people's lives, and but an important step was seeing that women had more rights.
We have a question from Olivia. I'm a CSU student also researching Theodosia. I was wondering if we know what she said during the National Convention. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So you can actually, it is recorded in one of the volumes of History of Women's Suffrage, which was a series of books written by Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, about the suffrage movement, history of the suffrage movement. And so if you Google this online, History of Women's Suffrage book, you can find this for free. It's available, and you can look at either Project Gutenberg or Happy Trust or something that might have open access to those. But if you need any help, I'm sure the library would help you track those down. But it has her full speech recorded, so you can see exactly what she said, some of the statistics she shared at that convention, both in 1902 and 1903.
And as part of that 1902 thing, since she was in Washington, another thing is just to Google her testimony at the House Judiciary Committee in 1902. That was February 1902. And Carrie Chapman Catt had representatives from the different states come and speak at the Judiciary Committee. And that's one of the places where Theodosia talks about, as she did at the convention, that indeed women's place is still secure in the home, and it's actually improved things, not caused great, consternation as men had feared. So it's interesting to read the testimony.
A question from Joan. Curious about what happened to Theodosia's younger sisters. Since neither married, do they continue teaching or pick up on Theodosia's work?
So her sister, the sister who does not figure in on the cottage, who is not in the Gwenthean, Farida Hazeltine, but she was called Tiny. She married fairly early, which is one of the reasons she doesn't actually figure so much in this story, and had several children. Her sister Annie, who was the next youngest, actually remained a teacher. She did never marry, and she was a teacher in the Denver public schools for over 40 years. She was also a very active participant in the Colorado Chautauqua, and was one of the founding members of the Rocky Mountain Climbers Club, which is still headquartered at the Chautauqua. So, but then the youngest one, Margaret's and my grandmother, Gwendolyn, did marry in 1900. She had been a teacher up until then. She was actually kind of interesting in that she taught kindergarten, which was a new kind of idea. And she taught it in the mining camps down by Trinidad. And that's how she met our grandfather, James McLaughlin. So at that point, though, then she was no longer able to teach. That's just almost always the way it was. And also not, except with the exception of homesteading, not able to own property, which was why the sisters all homesteaded, so that they could own land of their own, which was a great opportunity for women.
Another one for Catherine from Mandy. A quick question and comment on the cabin. Catherine, is that the original hand-painted cottage name sign? The font is beautiful.
As far as I know, that is the original. And if you looked at it, if you took a closer look, you'd see it's been very carefully painted around. A little bit of paint slopped almost onto the lettering, but as far as we know, it is the original. Yes, and that's kind of another thing, like the hinges and the door plate and all that kind of artistry and something. I struggle to try and letter things that nicely. I wish I could do that. It's beautiful.
Yeah, Mandy also says she really appreciates the hinge screen design. That's one of my favorite parts of it's just genius. I don't know what happened there. I don't know what we're doing these days. A question from Sarah. Thank you so much. On the slide before the cottage, when it showed the group of men and women with Theodosia outside the Chautauqua Domestic Science School, you had said there weren't many men involved. It seemed like there were a decent amount of men in the photo. Were those teachers? Did the men also teach different parts of domestic science?
Yeah, good question. So that was actually all faculty at the Colorado Chautauqua. So Theodosia, she was in charge of the School of Domestic Science, but especially in the early years of Colorado Chautauqua, the Chautauqua ran a summer school before the university took it over several years later. And so there were a lot of faculty members who taught a variety of subjects. And so that's what is pictured there, the faculty members for all of those different subjects, not just domestic science. So Theodosia was one of them. And yeah, there are a lot of men, and I think it's probably maybe not surprising that it was mostly men who would have been in charge of teaching. And there were both men and women who participated and attended the Chautauqua, both in Boulder and across the country.
Another one for Catherine. Do you still cook on that stove? What is it like?
No, I've never had to have the challenge of cooking on success. In fact, I don't really ever remember in my lifetime it being used, and that's because of the danger of fire. It's something we still worry about a lot at Chautauqua, and certainly we've been reminded about that this year in spades. So it was not used. There was, for a time after that was put out of commission, a little gas cook plate, and these days I have a little electric cook plate that goes on top of the stove. So yeah, it would be nice to be able to use it, but it totally makes sense. And there's still notes around the cottage that my mother wrote that fire is our greatest danger. So we're constantly reminded of that. So that's why it doesn't.
Understandable.
Yeah.
A couple people asked if this session will be recorded and made available. We are working on that, and we are going to find a way to a platform where we can put this on there for people to watch. So stay tuned and follow us on our newsletter and for more information about that. Catherine from Allison just wanted to say hi to Kathy from the Hines and the Harriets. You gave a great tour.
Those are some other descendants. So yeah, we've got some cousins on here. And I do want to just say a word just for, I think, our farthest flung participant tonight. And that's our dear friends down in Hobart, Tasmania, who have tuned in. So and they have stayed at the cottage when they visited us. So they know firsthand what it's like, but it's very nice of them to join us from so far away and a different time. It's tomorrow there. So yeah.
That's awesome. We've got one more comment here. Along with Sarah's possible book, it would be great gift to the history buffs of Boulder and Colorado if Margaret and Catherine could please write their family story. Also, love the ornate door hinges at Gwenthean.
Maybe if somebody wants to come and pull the weeds in the iris fields or something. So there's
There you go.
But while I've got my voice here, I do want to make sure that I say something, and that is thanks very much to Cindy Schmidt. None of this would have happened without Cindy and her committee thinking about this and working on it and bringing us all together, getting a hold of Sarah to do this wonderful presentation and making sure that the video got done. And we had a very generous anonymous donor that made it possible to have that video. So lots of people involved, and of course, the amazing staff at Chautauqua. I always appreciate that, Jason and Rhiannon, it's just great. So lots of people go into this, and so we're really glad that so many people joined in to take part in this. But thank you, Cindy. It's wonderful.
Oh, you bet. It's our pleasure. I'm so glad we made this happen. It's fantastic. We have two more quick ones, and then we will wrap it up. This is from Lydia, age 11, who goes into the cottage right now, in addition to Catherine.
So we have family and friends who come and stay there. This year, the cottage sort of socially distanced. It only had really one visitor. But over the years, we've never rented it, and people just come and stay if they can appreciate kind of stepping back and not having all the modern conveniences, and also remembering that this is an old structure and you have to treat it gently. But we've also been lucky the last few years. We've had field trips, third graders that come and experience stepping back in time and what it was like to be a child at Chautauqua 100 years ago. And they, as part of their field trip at Chautauqua, they get to go to the cottage. They also get to go to the silent film. So, but now people are going to be able to experience silent films right in their home through Chautauqua at home. So it'll be great.
Well, as someone that's worked in historic preservation for most of my career, it's incredible the shape that it's in. It really is a gem for sure, and unlike any other that we have at Chautauqua in that regard. And there's some real gems there too as well, but it really is a special one. So.
Well, and I think it shows there was something very purposeful, which, you know, some of the cottages were not that way. So, yeah, it's great. But I think my sister would join me in saying that my mother was always free to say that we didn't start out with the idea of historic preservation. We just didn't have the money to change it. So, but we eventually came to realize that was actually a blessing. So.
Well, with that note, we will close. Thank you all so much for doing this. It was awesome. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Take care, everyone at home. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Joining us virtually.